Thanks for joining us this morning for this special event. We're really excited to share some great news with you about the iPhone software roadmap. We've been working really hard on this, and we've got some really cool stuff to announce. So let's get on with it.
10 years ago today, Apple launched the App Store, and it's not hyperbole to say since then nothing has been the same. Not for apps, which went from being scarce niche products to part of popular culture like movies and music, and not for app development, which went from being something only a relatively few people did to something available and accessible to almost everyone. But let's back up. Before the iPhone and App Store, there were a bunch of different web-based software fiefdoms for Palm OS, BlackBerry, Symbian, and Windows Mobile that collected a hodgepodge of different freeware, shareware, and commercial programs. They were attached to a variety of checkout systems, employed inconsistent and often annoying licensing schemes, and required a lot of work to install and make work. They were expensive, particularly by today's standards, and they often took down your device whenever you launched them. Then came the iPhone. There were no third-party apps for it at first. That's led to some weird urban myths about Steve Jobs not wanting them or somehow having to be convinced or cajoled into doing it. But that's not true. Apple is a platform company. Jobs knew the potential of iPhone as a platform from the start. In fact, it's more likely Jobs had to be convinced to release the iPhone before the platform strategy was in place. Remember, it took everything Apple had to get the original iPhone out the door in June of 2007. There was literally nothing and no one left to even plan a platform strategy, not for year one, and everyone was so exhausted, year two looked iffy as well. That's why Apple tried to buy some time with the quote-unquote sweet solution of Web 2.0 apps. Web apps were a known quantity by then, so it took very little time to spin them up for iPhone. But they landed with such a thud, everyone, internally and externally, immediately realized there was no putting off native apps. They had to happen, and fast. So, barely finished the marathon of sprints that was the original launch, the iPhone team had to begin a second one towards apps. Apple wanted apps to be safe, secure, and simple so people could get them easily and trust they'd never crash the phone or the network or exploit or infect them in any way. There was some initial discussion about using AppKit, the Max framework, or WebKit, which powered Safari. Ultimately, though, Apple decided on something new, UIKit, and the App Store. On October 7, 2007 came the open letter from Steve Jobs. Let me just say it, we want native third-party applications on the iPhone, and we plan to have an SDK in developers' hands by February. We are excited about creating a vibrant third-party developer community around the iPhone and enabling hundreds of new applications for our users. With our revolutionary multi-touch interface, powerful hardware, and advanced software architecture, we believe we have created the best mobile platform ever for developers. And then on March 6, 2008, the iPhone SDK event.
You're a developer and you've just spent 2 weeks or maybe a little bit longer writing this amazing app. And what is your dream? Your dream is to get it in front of every iPhone user. And hopefully they love it and buy it, right? That's not possible today. Most developers don't have those kinds of resources. Even the big developers would have a hard time getting their app in front of every iPhone user. Well, we're going to solve that problem for every developer, big to small. And the way we're going to do it is what we call the App Store. This is an application we've written to deliver apps to the iPhone. And we're going to put it on every single iPhone.
Developers would get 70% and Apple 30%, which would pay for vetting, hosting, transactions, marketing, and would also subsidize free apps, which increased the total value for customers. Basically, buy a few paid apps and get a bunch more for free. It launched on June 10, 2008 alongside the iPhone 3G with Super Monkey Ball, Twitterrific, Facebook, AOL Messenger, Trism, Instapaper, and cliche as it sounds, nothing has ever been the same. Mac has an app store now, Windows has an app store now, Android, Amazon, Facebook, everybody has an app store. It's become the way apps are distributed to everybody, not just nerds. The age of pop apps literally began. To say it was akin to what iTunes had done to music by disintegrating the album or CD and selling songs for $1 is an understatement. Scarcity disappeared. Apps went from hundreds to thousands to millions. Pricing also got crushed as people went from downloading maybe a few high-priced apps a year, if that, to maybe wanting to download multiple new apps every week. every day. There was a lot of turbulence for a lot of years as customers started waiting for sales or sticking to free apps. Developers started cutting prices and cutting them again, or figuring out that no one would pay $10 for a game, but some people would pay that and more for ego or instant gratification of having a better farm than their friends or getting their car back on the track faster. Some developers held the line, even competing with free alternatives from Apple or Twitter or Google, pCalc, Fantastical, Twitterific and Tweetbot, Carrot and Weatherline, OmniFocus and Things, Halide and Obscura, Drafts and Agenda. Indies proved year in, year out that there was still a market for the best of handcrafted apps. I don't look at them so much as paid apps, but as investment in the features and services I want to use and keep using going forward. A couple of bucks here or there doesn't really matter. Having them shut down or go away from lack of support would matter a great deal. Just look at the apps that gave into VC-backed pump and dump social schemes or almost unplayable freemium models. And even though some called the App Store restrictive and perpetually predicted doom and gloom, no competing App Store, no matter how open its policies, managed to produce compelling apps the App Store couldn't. In fact, many of the most intriguing apps of the last decade, including Instagram, Uber, and Workflow, all debuted in the App Store. Roughly 4 or 5 years ago, there was another crossroads. Some people believed that the App Store, that iOS was as far along as it needed to go, that iOS 6 was pretty much all the features it would ever need, and that introducing more complexity would make it less accessible for people. Others believed that there was still a huge opportunity, that iOS could grow to do things the Mac did, maybe not in the same way as the Mac, but in its own right. That's why we went from having features like AirDrop rejected once, twice, to having them actually ship. Everything got a little bit nerdier, and with that, continuity, extensibility, better background access APIs, and a lot of the things we simply take for granted. The App Store also transitioned from being under the joint purview of Eddie Q on the services and editorial side and Phil Schiller on the marketing and developer relations side to being completely under Phil Schiller. That sort of singularity of focus, of it being one person's job, of it being accountable to a single senior vice president, helped it fix a lot of the problems of the past and start moving towards a better future, including a big iOS redesign last year and an upcoming Mac redesign this year. Like any industry growing from relative obscurity to maturity, there were and are a lot of growing pains, both from Apple in terms of fixing app review, providing better tools and metrics, and creating new feature streams for developers to tap into, and from developers themselves who had to realize that Gold Rush was never real. The lottery was always hard to win, mining was never as rewarding as farming, and real success took and takes real work. This was especially true as Apple added things like extensibility and now Siri shortcuts, which break apart the old branded binary blobs and start surfacing functionality where and when customers actually want to use it. Very soon, if not already, we'll be telling our devices what we want them to do and they'll be doing it. Here's an example. Just a few years ago, if you wanted to use strong, unique passwords, you had to go to a website or app, then exit it, find and launch your password manager, type in your authentication, find your login, copy it, go back to the app to fill it in, maybe repeat the process again, and that's after Apple added copy, paste, and multitasking. With extensibility in websites, you could just call up the share sheet, fire up an action item, and autofill it right there. No more launching your password manager. And with Touch ID and Face ID, your biometrics became your authentication. Now, with the Password Manager API, you'll be able to autofill into websites and apps without even calling up the share sheet. It makes even the complexity of security easy, accessible, and convenient. So much so, no one even has to think about using a strong, unique password anymore. Just go to dashlane.com/vector, download the free app, and get started. And because Dashlane is sponsoring the show, you can get a free 30-day trial and 10% off Dashlane's premium extra features and support. That's dashlane.com/vector. Thank you, Dashlane. 10 years ago today, Apple launched the App Store and everything changed. Now we're at the beginning of the next great revolution in apps. One that, given another 10 years, hell, maybe even just a couple of years, could make the quote-unquote apps of the future almost as unrecognizable today as the apps of the past in their boxed and shrink-wrapped $100 a copy were a decade ago. I have some ideas about how that's going to shake out, and I'll talk about them in a future show. But for now, I'm curious to hear what you think. What are your thoughts on the App Store 10 years later, and what do you want to see next? Hit like, hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.
So let's take a look inside the App Store. It's got the 5 buttons across the bottom, so we have a featured section, which is the ones we're featuring. Just added, staff favorites, And if I know what I want, I can easily search for something, in this case a backgammon game, and instantly find it. I can tap on it, get some screenshots, and get a write-up on it. And if I'm interested in using it, this one happens to be free. I just tap up there, and I tap the install button, and the app is wirelessly downloaded to the iPhone using the cell network or Wi-Fi. It's that simple to put the app right on the phone.